Alrighty, so I have got a stack of clocks here that I'm going to assemble, and I thought I would take this opportunity to do a very short tutorial not on how I make things, but rather how to put together a clock. If you're trying to make a clock, there are a number of different places online that sell these mechanisms, but they all sell pretty much the same mechanisms. This is the shaft length, and this is about as long as I've been able to find them. I've been able to find slightly longer ones on rare occasions, but for the most part this is as long as it gets. And for me it's necessary to get the long ones because I often have a lot of layers of things going on here. Like there's the initial layer, that's 1/4 inch wood, and then there's 1/8 inch wood. So it's got to go all the way through and have enough room for the things. Now this is actually a little overkill for this clock. I could go for a shorter one, but I've got other clocks that are deeper, and I basically just get something that I know is going to catch all and work for everything. So what they will do is they should send you the mechanism. They should provide you with something like this, which is all the different nuts and the little rubber bit that produces a buffer. And then depending on where you order from, they will either provide you with one free set of hands or you will have to buy them separately. I have never seen a place that provides hands and a second hand at the same time for free, unless you get those pre-made kits. You can usually find those at Michael's. You can find them on Amazon, where it's a kit that has a single clock mechanism and a set of hands. There's no selection of hands to choose from because they just have one set of hands, and they're usually really overpriced, like stupid overpriced for those little kits. So I definitely recommend going to one of the websites where you can just order the parts. You can order whatever hands you want, and you know, it works a lot better in my experience. So first, let's examine what we've actually got here for these hands. They will provide the rubber bit, which goes on first. The rubber bit will go on before anything else and before the clock. You want this thing to exist between the clock and the mechanism. It is a squishy buffer, and it's important because if this thing is tightened too much, it puts a strain on the mechanism and it won't keep time right. So that little rubber thing is actually important. The second thing that goes on is going to be this little nut, which is necessary in some instances. If you've just got something flat, it might not be so important, but I almost always use them unless I don't have room for it. Now after you've got, you know, your mechanism, your rubber bit, and the washer, then you've got this nut. So this nut will be specific to this movement. There are different sites that sell different movements, and the threading is not always the same. This is not standardized by any measure. It isn't like all clock mechanisms have the same threading and all of them use the same size nut with the same threading, and it's consistent, and you can get stuff anywhere and the pieces can mix and match, because they don't, like, at all. They never mix and match. I've got so many nuts and bolts and things that just are for one very specific kind of clock movement and don't work on anything else, and then keeping track of what is a pain in the butt. So you don't want to lose this, because it will work on this guy and you might find a different nut somewhere else and it won't. The other thing that they will usually provide you with is one of each of these. If they're decent, they will give you one of each. If they are not decent, they will only give you that, and I hate that. I have had places where I had to order the little guys separately, and I'm like, this is absurd. Really? And these are also incredibly specific to your movement. I've got like 5 different sizes of these stupid little nuts, and they're so easy to lose. They're tiny. They will just go flying off. But yeah, this guy is if you only intend to have a minute and an hour hand. This is if you have no intention of having a second hand, because this just caps it. If you need a second hand, that's what you need the little guy for. The little guy will let you put a second hand on. So we've got our movement, we've got the squashy bit, we've got the washer, and we got this guy. Now, you can do it by hand, you can do it with a pair of needle nose pliers. I've got this, which is the right size for this particular one, which is why I use it the most. Now, since I don't like to risk scuffing up the top, a lot of times what I will do is I will put this on the nut and hold it still. And what I'm actually turning is the back. So I'm screwing the nut in without moving this guy, so I don't scuff this part. And after it's tight enough, not too tight, but tight enough, then you can still twist this guy around and get it so it's in the right position. Oh, there's one thing that I want to point out that's very important. Not all quartz movements have the hook on it. Some of them are just flat plastic, and that's all there is to it. There is a separate hanger that you have to buy. And on the separate hanger, you would put it on first. See this little groove here? This little groove? This is where the hanger would set. It goes here, and it's usually bent. So it's like flat, bent, and then up. And then there's a little hole. That's the part that hooks on the wall. So you'd have the flat, bent hook part right here. And you would have to remember to put that on before the rubber bit and before you put it on the clock. So after we've got the big nut, we need to actually put on the hands. There are two different types of the hands here. Now, this is another thing to keep in mind. Not all movements are created equal. These are called Q80s. There's another kind of movement that are, I think they usually call them like push tops, and they have a different standard of hole. So you want to make sure that you get a movement that is compatible with whatever hands you pick out. If you get a pair of hands that have completely different holes, they're not going to fit on your movement, and you're going to be, screwed. But most clock movements that you can get and most hands that you get are going to be this style. So the first one you put on is the one with a big circle. Now the big circle is a push on, and it holds itself on. You'll see that there's this split here. There's a split, and that gives it enough wiggle room so that it pinches onto it, but you can push it over a lot of things. So it literally just gets pushed down onto this white piece. Just pushed on to the white piece, and it just holds itself there. And it isn't going to come off. It's good the way it is. This guy, which is the minute hand, requires more. This requires this tiny little nut. Now that nut does not like to go on straight. Like, you can try and screw this on with your fingers, and it will try to go like tilted. It will try to get cocked. The threading will be a real pain in the butt to get that to line up. They are a nightmare. I don't like them at all. And because I do a lot of clock assembly, it was worth it for me to get this tool. This tool can pick these guys up. You push this thing here, and it spreads that, which opens up this hole. Opens it up, and then it can grip on to these little guys. So you just grab hold of it, and then it's holding the nut. And look at all this leverage. Look at all this lovely space that you can hold on to that you don't have otherwise. And that's why it's so nice. But, like I said, I put a gajillion clocks together every year. It's worth it for me. This little tool by itself was like $20. So if you're only going to assemble like one or two clocks, a $20 tool is not worth it. Just do it with your fingers and, fiddle with it until it's good enough. So this end has two flat sides, and that matches up with the two flat sides. So you get it lined up. In this case, it's right here. Doing this funny. So you get it in place. See, there it is. And then you take your little tiny nut, and you have to make sure that this thing is going on straight, because it will try to go at an angle. There we go. And when it gets tight enough, here, you'll have to hold it still. You tighten it, but you do not want to over tighten it. you get it tight enough that this isn't loose anymore. I mean, it's got a teeny bit of wiggle room, but not much. But it's not loose. You don't want to tighten it too much because that can cause the whole mechanism to not work right. Oddly enough, it affects the second hand more than it affects the minute hand. You will sometimes get a second hand that will just, it'll work fine, work tick, 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 just fine, and then suddenly it'll get to a spot and it'll just tick, 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 repeatedly. And maybe it'll jump a little bit and then it'll just catch again. And that problem, more often than not, is because something is too tight. Either the tiny nut or the big nut is too tight. And if it's neither of those things, it's because your battery's probably too low. And if it still isn't any of those things, then yeah, the mechanism is probably faulty. It isn't that unusual for these things to not work out. I have had so many of these things turn out to be crap. The place I buy them from guarantees them with a lifetime warranty. You're supposed to be able to always send them back if they don't work. The problem is that, of course, I'm assembling these things, I'm sending them to customers. Customers say, hey, it's not working right. I'll send them a replacement. I can't really ask them to take the broken one and send it somewhere else. I mean, that's an expense on their shoulders. It's not their fault that the company that provides me clock mechanisms provides pieces of junk half the time. So yeah, most of the time, I just kind of have to swallow that bill. Anyway, so we've got our minute hand and our hour hand. The bolt's tight. The last step is the second hand. And the second hand is another push on. All you do is push it on. There's this tiny little thing. There you go. And finally, battery. And I usually let them run for about 5 minutes to make sure that they work and that they keep time. Do I have it backwards? Ugh, I hate these things. No, maybe my battery's dead. Wouldn't it be funny if I just put together a faulty one? I insulted it. It doesn't like me. Let's do a quick test, see if it's the mechanism or the battery. I don't doubt it's the battery, honestly. Yep, that one's faulty. See? Look. So many of these are junk. Because this one's working fine. But it didn't work in this guy. So many of these are junk. It drives me crazy. And I've complained to them. And they're like, no one else really has problems. And I'm like, you are so full of crap. I have bought so many of these things that were dead on arrival that I know that there are other people experiencing this too. So, that's why I test it. Always test it before that goes out or, before you stick it on your wall, obviously. Because so many of these are garbage. And it just drives me crazy. So take it apart. Pull this guy up. Then we're down to this. I hold the back. Get it into place. I loosen it from here. So I'm not scuffing the front. And then I can just do the rest by hand. Let's pull this guy out. There's our washer. Now let's do a quick test. Let's see if this guy works by itself here, taken apart, because it's always possible that stuff was too tight. So I push that guy in. Second hand is in. Battery. Make sure it's the right direction. See, now it wants to work. It was probably too tight, but that doesn't mean that this guy isn't faulty, because clearly it's too sensitive. Oh, this is another one that I want to show you. So these clocks that I offer them with a pendulum. Now there are clock kits that you can buy where it's a pendulum type built in. More often than not, they're way overpriced in comparison to just everything else. And they're also harder to come by. And instead I've found that I prefer these. So this thing is a pendulum conversion kit. Now I think it's important to start off by saying that every quartz movement out there, every battery operated plastic little automatic clock that has a pendulum as a part of it is fake. I mean, on a real clock, a pendulum serves a purpose. It helps keep the time. It's what actually makes the seconds and everything. It drives everything. The pendulum does. On these guys, it doesn't do anything. There's actually two different mechanisms inside of it, and one of them is literally just a little magnet. So your battery in there is powering the clock mechanism as one unit, and it's powering the battery that swings the pendulum as a separate unit, and they have nothing to do with each other. That pendulum is not connected to keeping time on your clock movement. It is just there to look neat. It serves the aesthetic purpose of looking like an old type clock, but it isn't real, which is one of the reasons why these conversion kits, you know, it's the same deal. So this is the conversion kit thing. Down here you can see the magnet. It's like a little electric thing. It's got copper wire wound around it, and it powers this back and forth. And this thing right here is a ceramic magnet. This little piece of black right here, ceramic magnet. And as this thing goes, this is just pushed back and forth. And that's what makes the pendulum move. So there's these little clips on the side here, and you want to do it kind of delicately, because if they snap, that's it. You're kind of shit out of luck. But that makes it so that you can remove this guy, and now this is open. You take one of your movements and you put it in. Now I tend to put it in sideways because it makes it easier to access this guy, and we don't need this anymore because the hook up here, this is the part that's going to be attached to the wall, not this. This is made obsolete, so I like to put it sideways. You put this guy back in place, and then snap this guy gently back on. There we go. So now we have our quartz mechanism and our pendulum. And they use two separate batteries. You've got your clock and your pendulum. So just like on the other one, the first thing you got to do is you put on your little piece of rubber, right? So it goes here. Then you have the washer and the nut. Hold that. Turn this guy. So get that lined up with the top. This is the top of the clock. Get that lined up. And then we've got our hands. The hour hand slides on to the little white piece. And the minute hand has to line up with the grooves. I usually move it up there. Tiny little nut. See, now you can see, like, this thing is crazy loose. Like, it's loose, right? And you want to put this on tight enough that it no longer is loose in that direction, but not so tight. There we go. Now I start to feel resistance, and I go a little bit further, and I stop and remove it. And now it's only got, you know, a teeny bit of wiggle, but not really. It's as much wiggle as that little piece of metal lets you have. Take a second hand, push it down. Alright, now let's see if this is going to work or if my battery is just too weak, because I think that's a legitimate possibility that this battery is weak. Well, let's see it. Nope. Oh, it's working. So yeah, this guy's no good. And there we go. Working clock movement. Now for the pendulum part, you might want to adjust the length. I find the longer it is, the less likely it is that that pendulum's going to work very well, because that little magnet isn't super powerful. And I don't want it super long anyways, but you can bend these with just a regular pair of needle nose pliers. And they've got these little notches that make it easier to bend it at places, and it literally just snaps right off. And I also like to try and bend it so that there's a teeny bit of a curve at the end that goes back in the same direction that this guy goes. That guy, curve that way. Because when you put it onto here, there's this little slot that you feed it into, and you want to get it to come out that slot. And sometimes that little curve helps. And push it down to there, and you got your pendulum. Ta-da! So in addition to testing that, let's also test the pendulum. Let's see which is plus. That's the plus. And you can kind of see it. So it's not very strong, but none of them are. And of course, when it's leaned back like this, there's enough friction that it's going to have trouble. And there it goes. Hopefully that's visible. Can't see very well. There we go. So that is how to put together a clock, which is useful if you are making a clock from scratch, but also if you are having to repair one or replace the mechanism because it gave out, because they do that too. Like I said, these are not the most well-made things, you know. I love this. USA engineering and quality made in China. And that is where the vast majority of these things come out of. They are coming in bulk out of China. You can, the website that I purchased mine from is clockit.com, and it's spelled with a K. Klockit. And the only reason that I shop from them is because they have all of the things that I want in one place. They have the Q80 movements, they have a large selection of hands, they have the pendulum conversion kit. The thing is that the shipping is so slow, and I'm not one to talk. I am not a speedy shipper. I am not Amazon. I have to make the things and I have to ship them, and it is never quick. With Clockit, it's just, I mean, they're not making things, they're sticking them in a box, and it still takes like 3 weeks for them to show up. And they are from the United States. This isn't coming out of China. I have ordered things off of AliExpress, and they showed up faster than they showed up from Clockit. You know, these are things that are getting free shipping out of China, and that can take like 45 days for stuff to show up, and I've still had stuff show up faster from AliExpress. The problem is that there's just so much inconsistency everywhere else. Like, I'll find a really good pendulum mechanism kit from one website, and it's much more affordable, but they don't have the movements that I like, or they only have like 3 hands to choose from, and I hate them all. So then I have another website where I get the mechanisms and the hands, and it's just spread all over the place, and it drives me crazy. So I kind of bit the bullet, and I will always order from Clockit, even though I don't like them. I really don't. But you take what you can get. I hope that that helped. If you are at this video because I sent you here because of a repair, I'm sorry. I try very hard to make sure that before I send these out to someone that they work, but sometimes things go bad in shipping and I have no control over that. And sometimes they work fine when I test them, and then they show up on your doorstep and you stick a battery in and suddenly nothing's working, and I am sorry. I try. I do. But anyways, and if you're just here because you want to make your own clock, the way to go, because it's not that hard. You could take a dinner plate and a drill and some water and get a hole in it, and you could make a clock out of that. I mean, you can do all sorts of stuff. You can make anything into a clock. I see people making records into clocks, and that's a really cool idea too. You can customize it. You can make whatever you want. You get something circular, you put some numbers on it, you put a clock moving on it, you got yourself a clock. It's a lot of fun. They're really cool, and they can make great gifts. Great gifts for people, birthday presents, Christmas presents. Personalized stuff always goes over so much better with people than just some random gift card. So I hope that this was helpful. I hope that you could hear me well. I am in my workroom right now, and the laser cutter is actually running in the background, and I'm using a lavalier mic, and I have no idea how well the audio's turned out. I'm sure it's awful, but hopefully you could hear me. I guess that's pretty much it. If you found this helpful or you liked it in any way, a like would be great. I'd appreciate it. Sharing it with anyone else you know who also likes to make things and might to benefit from fixing or repairing or creating a clock from scratch. So share it with your friends if you feel like it. Leave any comments down below. If you've got any questions, feel free to drop me a line. And I think that is pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed the video. Have a nice day and don't forget to be awesome. Bye-bye.